And he said, you know what? I won't have the cornflakes, but hit yourself. And Yael said, are you angry at me? And Adar said, yes. Why are you going back? Stay with us. It's a war. We need you. You're our dad. Don't go.
Welcome to What Came After. I'm your host, Manya Marcus. On What Came After, we'll take a look at the many ways that people's lives changed on and after the brutal massacre in Israel on October 7th, 2023. We'll be speaking with people in Israel and around the world about how the devastating attack by Hamas has shifted, shaped, and changed them. To learn more about our podcast, please visit us at whatcameafter.com. Today, I'm joined by Talya Tomer. Talya is a Jerusalem-based artist who focuses on immersive public art installations. Talya creates and installs her work with the help of community members. Talya is also a wife and mother whose husband left for reserve duty on October 7th. A few weeks after the start of the war, Talya led a team of creatives that produced a children's book. The book, Family in Reserves, is based on Talya's and her children's personal experience as the family of a soldier serving in the reserves. Talya's second book, Family Without a Home, focuses on the experience of children of evacuated families. Talya, thank you so much for joining me. I am wondering if we can actually start right on October 7th and have you tell me where you and your family were and describe that day for us.
So we were in bed. I have 3 kids between 2.5 and 8, and a 6-year-old. We were in bed. We had to get out of bed when we heard a siren, ran out to the steps, had no idea what was going on, obviously. We started getting on the news, finding out what's going on, realizing we need to prepare the shelter downstairs full of cockroaches. So we were busy cleaning up, and the kids were kind of near the shelter downstairs in the parking lot. Yair was up and down. My husband was walking up and down doing stuff. And at some point he came and said, don't freak out, but I'm leaving. And he went to the army, leaving me with the 3 kids here. So I prepared the miklat, put the tent in it in case we needed to sleep there because I had no intention of sleeping with bugs. So I prepared everything, brought toys down and everything. Then there weren't many sirens anymore. So we came upstairs. I made a pot of pasta. And then I started to freak out, to realize that I don't want to be home alone. I have no idea what's going on. I imagined the worst things because we were starting to understand how bad the situation is and who can we trust. So it was insane. So I looked for people I can go to, and my cousin said, of course, come over. I have cousins down south, and she's their sister. And I had no idea what I'm getting into because we had no idea how bad the situation is. I had no idea what we're dealing with at that point. I wrote to my cousin in the morning, Tadi, and she was in Cholit. I wrote to her that we're thinking of them, and she didn't answer. So I went to my cousins here in Yerushalayim, and I walk into the house, and they're sitting around the table, my aunt and uncle, my cousin, her husband, their 4 kids, having a chag meal. And I sit down next to my aunt, and she whispers to me in English, do you know what's going on? And I said, no. And she said, well, we've lost contact with, I have 2 cousins living there. They were at a party, the men, their brothers. They were at a party. They were hiding in a creek because my cousin was very wise and said, we're not leaving. We don't know what's going on. We stay. And he hid with another family with 2 kids and another friend and his brother. They hid in the creek. They hid the cars under a tree, and they stayed. In the meantime, he spoke to his wife with their 2 kids in the house. He reminded her how to use the M16 because it was in the house. He had his pistol, I guess, ekdach, on him. And at that point, we already knew Ahuvia's partner, Teila, was murdered in her bed. The neighbor already gave him that news. And then they lost contact with Adi and the boys. So that's what they knew. And as the kids are singing at the table, that's what's going on. They already know these news. They're keeping it very, very subtle, very happy still, very hopeful. And it's awful beyond anybody's imagination. At this point, Yair went down south. We didn't know what's going on with him. He had no idea what's going on. It was a mess. So we stayed there for a few days. That night, we already realized about the kidnappings. I don't remember exactly what happened when. All the kidnappings were already known. They weren't found in the house, so we knew that they were kidnapped. Adi and the two boys. And later that night, the boys came back with a neighbor to the kibbutz. The terrorists took them into Aza, and then at some point, there's videos of this. They kidnapped them with a neighbor. The neighbor was holding the baby. He was tiny. He was still nursing. And they kidnapped the neighbor with the two boys, and then they just left the 4-year-old on the ground and pointed to Vital to just go back. So she dragged two boys with her and came back to the kibbutz later in the evening. So the boys are safe now. And later that week, we found out that Adi was murdered while she was trying to save the kids.
Now, these people are cousins that you're describing who've all endured this. Okay.
Yeah. So, they're close. Twice a year, we go down there to the pool and just to have a barbecue on their lawn. And the things that happened there that day on that same lawn is beyond words.
So it sounds like in the span of, I don't know how many hours, your husband leaves to reserve duty. You're alone with your children, and then you're trying to keep the information under wraps that several of your relatives are either missing or have died. And is that 12 hours, 24? How fast has all this?
I think this is less than 12. By midnight, we already knew all this, I think. We didn't know Adi was dead. We knew 90% by midnight. But I was, at that point, trying to keep my kids together. And I realized that they need home. So we came back home. My dad came and moved in. My sister-in-law came with her kids just to keep everything busy and structured. 2 of my brothers were called up and a brother-in-law. So men were not around at that point. It was a very, very confusing time and scary and hard. And I was confused and I had no words to speak to my kids about this stuff. I had no tools. What do you say? At that point, we knew Adi was dead. They know the kids, they know them, they played with them. So it wasn't like this distant idea of a mother being murdered. They know her. And the concept of a mother being murdered was too harsh. My eldest, she's 8. A few years back, when the war in Ukraine started, she said that she really hoped she'll never live through a war. And all I could think about was the fact that my kids are living through a war, and not only living through a war, but the conversations were awful. Between them, they're 6 and 8. They started talking about the option of Abba dying and of him being killed at war. And the story they built themselves was that Adi is in Aza and Abba went to find her. So Abba's fighting terrorists looking for Adi. How do you take that apart? And what do you build instead as a story? And also just missing Abba and the question if Abba's going to die. And it kept coming up by Goni and then by Hadar. And it just kept coming up, this question. And what you should tell your kids is, no way, Abba's a Superman. Nothing will ever happen to him. I couldn't do that because I was petrified. And I knew they'd never forgive me if I lied. And I couldn't I just couldn't. So I looked for books, and there were no books to talk about this unbelievable situation. And then I wrote to the psychologist we were in touch with. Now, you have to understand that those days, nothing was happening. There were no stores. Everybody shut down. There wasn't anybody to go to because you felt everybody was in this deep, deep trauma. And I didn't know where my psychologist is at. If I could even approach, she's my kid's psychologist. Can I approach her? What is she going through? Maybe she's in worse condition than I am, and I'm going to just bring all my trouble. So I wrote to her a very long message, and she wrote back, just come over. We'll talk. I came in and I sat on her couch and I said, I need to leave here with a narrative. I need to leave here with what do I say to the kids? So we sat, we broke it all up into like pieces, and we built a better narrative with a truth in it, a big chunk of the truth by saying Adi was murdered and she's no longer with us, but how strong our army is and how resilient we can be and will be. All these things that will create a sense of strength within their tiny little brains.
Well, as you're saying this, I'm wondering if it felt helpful to you also to hear the narrative decompressed and repackaged, not just for your children, but also for yourself.
It made such a difference. That day, I left her clinic. I walked down the street. I found my dad with my kids on the sidewalk playing. I asked if there's chalk, and I drew a map of Israel on the sidewalk. I went and looked at my cheat sheet just to make sure I have all the story correctly and all my tips. I sat down and I drew the map of Israel and I said, this is where Gaza is. This is where we are. Abba already moved up north. He's over there. Adi was killed in Gaza, so she's no longer there. We have such a big army, and the Air Force is flying all over. America just sent the air carrier, the aircraft carrier.
Mm-hmm.
We have that, and that's parked here. And we showed them pictures, and we showed them what a tank was. Like when I grew up, I knew what a tank was. I don't think they've ever seen a tank.
Mm-hmm.
We sheltered them, and we thought we're beyond this war time in Israel. And they've never climbed it. When I climbed a tank many times when I was a kid. They've never seen a tank. So I needed to explain how the army works and what different parts of it there is and how everybody works together and how we're the strongest, and it doesn't matter how much evil we encounter, we can win because we're good. All the good people are on our side. And I kind of created this narrative, and it was a breath of fresh air. Everything relaxed after that. And it was life-changing. That conversation on the sidewalk it changed everything. Mamash. The conversations changed, the relaxation changed, the mood in the house. Everything relaxed. Wasn't good, but it was better.
Let me pause here for a second and ask you, you mentioned the fact that we raise our children differently than we were raised, and that we have tried to protect them from some very harsh realities, hoping that they have gone away. Do you have any regrets or misgivings or thoughts about how you would have parented or wish you had parented differently to prepare the kids for the possibility that there is evil in the world?
I think I'm very lucky that my kids are very, very young. If I had older kids, I might answer this question very differently. My kids are very, very young. My sister has teenagers. She has a kid going into the army. And they have friends from around Gaza. They were online with their friends as the 7th was happening. They were on WhatsApp groups with friends fighting for their life. Now I'm interested in asking her that question. I don't know what her answer would be, but I don't think I regret anything. I wished, and I still wish, that we could live in peace. I wish this was not my reality. I wish I'd never have to tell my kids all this stuff. I wish they will never know that bombs just went off in buses across the street from here when I was a teenager. That's not something I want them to know. They live in a world where a bunch of my daughter's teachers are Muslim and come with hijab to school. And when we were in Tel Aviv one day, we went to the beach and we went through Rehov Trumpeldor, and just completely innocently, I told my kids who Trumpeldor was. So Trumpeldor was a Jewish soldier before the state of Israel. He was one of the people fighting for the state of Israel. He came from the Second World War with no arm from Russia, if I'm not mistaken. And then the kids innocently asked who we were fighting when we created the state of Israel. And I answered, the Arabs. And I guess I've never said that to my kids, because my son looked up at me and said, what? But my Ganenet's an Arab. Ganenet is a kindergarten teacher. And I was like, yeah, well, it's complicated. And so going back to the question, if I regret anything, no, I don't regret anything. But there is a time where we'll have to shutter the reality which we've created that is more peaceful than it really is.
So there's this other component about what you're describing, going to the kid's psychologist, leaving with this blueprint that we'll talk about in a minute, but would later become the book. It sounds a little bit to me like you were in a silo, like you were very internally focused. Were you talking to other women whose partners had left and figuring out what they were telling their children? Was there any kind of crowdsourcing? How are we all describing this to our kids?
So at that point, things were just starting to get together. Now there's a lot. Like there's a big Facebook group of mothers and women with husbands in reserve duty. And there's a lot of friendships, because the reality is, as time goes by, that life gets back to normal. So yes, I was talking to a few and connecting to just not feel so alone. It was scary. Not everybody understood what we're going through because it was different than the rest.
So Yair was originally sent to Gaza, or was he up north?
He was sent down to Gaza, but he didn't go in and he didn't fight there. Thank God. He was sent up north.
Was he able to keep in touch with the kids while he was away?
Although I'll say that it's a good question, because there are men that couldn't be in touch with their kids. It's very, very hard for the men, I think. And I love my husband very much, and I appreciate him very much. Every time he goes out to reserve duty, it's very, very hard to hold the tension. It's a very delicate tension between your life and the army. And once you're in that zone, it's very, very hard to become a father in minutes. Very hard. So he did keep in touch every now and then. He sent me, I asked for videos for my toddler, and he sang songs like nursery rhymes. He went, hi, Ro'i, it's Abba again. And then there would be, do you want to read this or do you want to sing this? And he would sing it. And my kid would just go and yell at him, no, wheels on the bus, wheels on the bus. And then he would swipe to the right video to see wheels on the bus. With the little one, I felt it was critic to see Abba every day, to read a story. With the bigger kids, it's very complicated to be in war and to be a father at the same time.
So now I want to talk about the book. It sounds like all of these experiences really gave birth to the first book. Can you tell us what it is, when you wrote it, how it came together? You also worked with an illustrator. Give us an introduction to how this project came to be.
So it's a project. I don't think it's a book. It's a project, and I like that word better. So I felt like I needed reinforcement for the narrative. And I went to look for a book. And my dad looked for a book. There was a book when I was a kid. It was called Abba Yotze Miluim. Abba's Going Out to Reserves. It was a great book at that time. It was about a dad going in all the different jobs that different dads have in the army. One is a cook, one is a tank, one is this, one is that. And they all work together to create this army. Very important. But first of all, I couldn't find it. And it wasn't giving what I needed. To my kids, I left the bookstore, and literally on the steps, I said to myself, there isn't a book, there has to be a book. I must not be the only one stuck with the situation. We need to find a book. And if there isn't, we need to create one. started dialing to the first illustrator that came up to my mind, and I hung up because it didn't feel right. And then I called Daniela, who illustrated the book, and I will say she's crazy enough to say yes. And I said, Daniela, we need to put a book out in 2 weeks because it needed to go out yesterday. Would you illustrate it? And she said yes. And then I said to her, look, I have no money. And I started thinking, we'll fundraise, I'll write the book, start illustrating now. You don't know what the story is, but there's a kid, there's a dad, start working. And this is still on the steps of the store. I walk off the steps and I see a friend, and I say to him, we're writing a book. And he says, cool, what about? I said, well, it's family and reserves. He says, okay, what do you need? He started spitballing with me. Was on my way to meet another friend that her husband's in reserve. And on the way, I spoke to another friend with a husband in reserve, and he said, well, what do you need? What am I doing? What's my job? What's my role? I said, well, fundraising. She said, okay. She started writing up this fundraiser. She found the website where we fundraise, and it just happened. I came home. My dad was on the computer. I said, well, we're putting out a book. I said, okay, what? Edith already wrote the fundraiser. My dad started emailing it. And I went into the room, sat on the computer, started writing a text, turned it into a Google Doc, and sent it to all kinds of friends to just work on it together. And everybody gave their input. And I kind of fixed it up, added what I needed. I knew the structure, Kido. I knew what the story needs to be. It needed to build the confidence in the kids on one side. It needed to give the sense of belonging and the reason we're doing this, why we're fighting, why we're here. That's something that I felt like it really needed. We needed an ethos page, a page that just says in one illustration why we're here, bichlal. Because I feel that also wasn't something that we were like talking about anymore, Kido.
And even with your kids being, the oldest was 8, you felt that an ethos, an explanation was really critical for even that age group.
Yes. When coming and going back to the army was tough. Very, very tough. Every time. When he came, it was lovely, but there was always tantrums. And then when he left, it was awful. And I had to deal with a week of detoxing everything that had to be processed. They had a fight about cornflakes. Obviously, that was not an issue with me because who cares about cornflakes and the amount of sugar the kids eat when there's a war going on? Yair came back and was worried about the kids and wanted them to eat healthy and didn't want to just give cornflakes or cereals freely. And they were having a really tough tantrum. And at some point, I said to him, it's not about this. Go into a room. Just take him into a room. And they went, and Hadar was crazy. And then he stopped. And he said, you know what? I won't have the cornflakes, but hit yourself. And Yael said, are you angry at me? And Hadar said, yes. Why are you going back? Stay with us. It's a war. We need you. You're our dad. Don't go. Stay here. And you need an ethos. You need a reason. You need to be able to tell your kids why we're here, why we didn't go and live in a peaceful place and just run away, why we're doing this. You have to be able to say that. And that's also something we kind of haven't done because we thought we're living in a peaceful place. And yes, a 6-year-old needed an ethos. He needed to know that there's a bigger reason to being here and a bigger reason to fight for this place. And I needed it.
Well, I think I might need it because I want to know. What is the ethos? What did you put into the book?
It's not good enough for you.
That's okay.
No, but it's good enough for an 8-year-old. The wording is not as important, I think, as the picture, but it's the 2 kids and the dad standing with the flag behind them, and they're all saluting. Ben Gurion's in the background, and the Declaration of Independence is in the background. And it kind of just says, I think, in a page after the tantrum is also in the book. And then it says in a page, we all have a job, and this is Abba's job. It says that our country has an important moment, And we all have a role to play in this moment. And this is Abba's role, and that's why he has to go. So it leaves a lot of place for interpretation. I think the book in general is not the answers, but it sets the stage for conversation. I'm not sure also the ethos in all the families is the same. I'm not sure every family that sends the father to reserve duty, and yes, we send them. It's not, they're called, but every kid that sent their father to war allowed the father to go. Because they could throw a tantrum and the father would stay. And if the wife says no more, the father stays. And it's happened, and it should happen because it's hard. So every man that is there, there's somebody who let him go. If it's a toddler, or if it's a mother, or if it's a wife, they were let. They were given permission to fight for all of us.
What was Yair's reaction to you writing the book?
I don't think he got it at first. He was very far away. I think it later hit him how important it was. When his friends started looking for it and then found out it's his wife. Because we gave it out. We fundraised, and then we gave out 26,000 copies all over Israel. And that also happened just in a miracle. People came, took a pile, and took it to other places in Israel and gave it out. Everything was very, 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 it just happened.
Sounds very grassroots.
Very, very, very grassroots. The whole situation was very special and moving and unique.
You did not illustrate the book.
No.
But you are an artist. Are you also a writer or?
No.
Okay. So
I don't like text. I get nervous of writing a text message. I do not enjoy writing at all. But I do create things. I study in Bezalel. I'm an artist. I do community street art. But that's why I wanted to write that I'm the creator. It's the biggest project I've ever done. Its influence was felt in many places. Like,
did you ever think about doing the illustrations yourself?
No, because it's a children's book. And as much as I'd like to be an illustrator, I'm not there yet. And it needed to be done well. This book needed to be, first of all, it needed to be fast. I couldn't train myself to be an illustrator that fast. And I wanted it to be good. And Daniela is amazing. She's not only an illustrator, she does animation. And she works in a technique with cutouts. And she can connect between realism and illustration very, very well. And I feel like that was very necessary for the book. I feel like she wasn't the Bריrat Mechdal. She wasn't the default. She was the right person, love her work. And she bemet managed to connect the text with the illustrations in a magnificent way to me. All the uniforms in the book and all the army is real. We didn't illustrate the army. The army is real. The dad is illustrated. But the uniforms are always real. We never illustrated a gun. Because you don't illustrate a gun to me. I didn't want to fake it. I didn't want to fake the reality. There is a war. The army is real. Guns are everywhere. We see guns much more. Like, the gun was an issue. When Yair came home for Shabbat and there was an M16 in my house, I cringed. It was hard for me. The reality was just too harsh.
So let me ask you a question. The ethos that you put in the book, you acknowledge it's not everybody's ethos, but it speaks broadly enough that it seems to really have made an impact. Do you think that it also reflects your husband's ethos?
Completely. I'm much more confused than my husband. I think my husband, as a soldier, in this situation since October 7th, it's been very straightforward for him. He knows what he needs to do. He knows what's right and what's wrong much better than I am. I have a lot of question marks with the reality in Israel, with the politics, with the demonstrations. Everything's a question. And to him, I would say he's lucky. It's very hard to say about all these men in combat that they're lucky. But they are lucky in a way where things are very simplified to them. because they know what they need to do. They know what the right thing is. It's very straightforward for them. They need to guard. They need to save us. They need to fight evil. For the rest of us, we have to deal with reality, which is much more complex than being in the army. I think around the ethos is a little different between families. But the core, I think we're all on the same page. And I think that's what we tried putting in the book. And I know to say that around Israel, this book went, as I said, from all parts of community, from all parts of society, from the hills of the Shomron to the city of Tel Aviv, everywhere. Everyone took books. And we've gotten reactions from hundreds of families. There's something about the ethos that's everybody's on the same page. We get very confused with everything else that's going on. But with all the miluimnikim, the reservists, it's very clear. The ethos is clear.
And kids know when something is authentic. They've
Yes,
responded.
Completely. We've gotten many videos of kids that do not reading the book out loud. Kids that just memorized it and internalized it and felt like it's telling their story. When kids say, "How'd you write the book about me?" Many kids reacted that way. A mom wrote to me like a few months ago that her husband finished the few first months. Then he came home. And then the dad had one day of reserves that he had to go to. He had to put on a uniform in the morning. And she was preparing for the worst day. She was preparing for the worst tantrum. She was terrified that he'll come out of the room with the uniform and her kid will just melt down. And the dad came out of the room and the kid said to him, "You going to the army?" And he said, "Yes, but only for one day." And he said, "It's okay. You can go." The kid in the book said it's okay for his dad to go. You can go too. And I think many kids have done that. It took this reality and gave it words and gave place for the anger, gave place for the disappointment, for the fear. We were very delicate about the fear. But sometimes I imagine what war is, and I imagine Abba riding on dragons. What does war look like to a toddler or to a 6-year-old? When we say war, what do we imagine? So they're imagining dragons because that's what they see in the movies, or they're imagining Spider-Man and shooting strings out of your hands. They're not imagining what we're imagining. So what happens in that void of imagination? I think the book gives the stage to talk about and the possibility for parents to have words to frame this reality.
Well, I really want to thank you for sharing all of this. It's remarkable work. We didn't even get to the second book. Maybe that'll be another episode. But it really sounds like this has had a huge impact on an important community. So thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you very much for coming.
אני תכף מאבד את זה, בלילות אני בוכה הרבה, הכל צפוף ואין מקום, יש משפחה ואין שלום, אני תכף מאבד את זה, אני תכף מאבד את זה, וכמה שאני פוחד מזה, את החמלה ואת החום, להתעורר עם החלום, לעזאזל אני רוצה את זה. אם זה כן, תגידי כן, ואם זה לא, תגידי לא, רק אל תתני לי שוב להתאכזב, כי אם זה לא שלי אני עוזב. בואי רגע נדבר אמת, רק עכשיו אני פתאום קולט, איך רצתי סולו בלי לראות לא הקשבתי לשתיקות, איך כמעט איבדנו זו את זה. אם זה כן, תגידי כן, ואם זה לא, תגידי לא. רק אל תתני לי שוב להתאכזב. אם זה לא שלי אני עוזב. אם זה לא שלי אני עוזב. אני תכף מאבד את זה, רק תגידי שאני לא זה. אל תתני לי שוב להתאכזב. אם זה לא שלי אני עוזב. אם זה לא שלי אני עוזב.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe to What Came After wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us online at whatcameafter.com.